downfall. Linda was never the good witch. Gossip and spreading rumors will be your downfall. She threw her into the dead ditch. Jealousy makes you lose everything, that's the cost. How about you just stay in the land of the lost? Besties with the witch of the west. Hate on us, but you're still obsessed. Getting me to be the big bad villain, babe, go get a psychoanalysis. Because I know I'm one in a million, but it's fine, I'll be your protagonist. You're talking too much, we can all hear your whispers. Calling us wicked is a little insulting. You gave them to her, but you can keep the rest with first thoughts. Your word goes, girl, but that's just disgusting. You can call me the bad witch, but I'm not the snitch. So tell me which is which? Which is which? Which is which is which? Mirror on the wall, who's the saddest one of all? Glenda was never the good witch. Gossip and spreading rumors will be your downfall. She threw her into the dead ditch. Jealousy makes you lose everything, that's the cost. How about you just stay in the land of the lost? Besties with the witch of the west. Hate on us, but you're still obsessed. Hating me to be the big bad villain, babe, go get a psychoanalysis. Because I know I'm one in a million, but it's fine, I'll be your protagonist.
Possibility of developing and changing a character, and secondly, the rules for developing a character, either in ourselves or others. First rule is character is in the will, not in the intellect. Secondly, as regards others, look for the best. That is to say, in others. Third rule, look for the worst in ourselves. First of all, the possibility of character. I believe every single person in the world has just a certain amount of energy, and some are much more richly endowed than others with it. If we use an example from physics, we might say that certain people, for example, have what might be called 10 ergs of energy. They have just that much. And then others have 20, and others have 50 ergs of energy. The result is that they're able to go in the direction of goodness, and they're able to go in the direction of evil, too, with much greater rapidity and energy than others. And this energy, as I say, is not the same in every human being. I think that possibly any sinner is capable of being a great saint. And any saint is also capable of being a great sinner. Now let us give an example here of how this energy works. We say, first of all, some have little energy and they go in the direction, call this goodness. They have 10 units of energy here, and they only go in this much, either toward goodness or toward evil. Others have 20, and they go much more, either in the direction of goodness or the direction of evil. So that a person who has a great tendency toward evil can completely change and become very good, particularly with the grace of God. I believe that Lenin, who did so much to establish communism in Russia, just barely missed by a hair's breadth of becoming a St. Francis of Assisi. If he had only gone in the other direction, the direction of goodness, instead of the direction of revolution and hate, he would have been a great saint. And if St. Francis of Assisi had gone in the opposite direction, as he had gone in the direction of virtue, he would have been a Lenin. The secret, therefore, of character development is the realization of this power that there is in each and every one of us, for good and for evil. The monasteries, the religious houses, the places of asceticism throughout the world have in them actual saints, but potential devils. Any one of those persons, because they have so much character, if they ever let themselves go in the direction of pride, lust, or avarice, would become very vicious. And the penitentiaries are filled with individuals who have this great energy. And if someone could only lay hold of it and make them take the high road instead of the low, they would be our saints and our heroes and our great patriots. The point that I want to make is there's nothing wrong with passion and energy and strength, so long as it is properly channeled. Notice that our divine Lord, for example, when he wished to make a great apostle, laid hold of a bigot. Paul was one of the greatest bigots that ever lived. And only he who could ever hate like a Saul could ever love like a Paul. Our blessed Lord never extinguished, for example, the passions of a Magdalene. Only someone who was as vicious and as evil as Magdalene could ever become as virtuous as Magdalene. She has been called the 13th apostle. Her life has been such an inspiration in bringing men to goodness. Now, though some of us do not have as much energy than others, let us not forget that a person with only 10 units of natural energy can surpass a person with 100 units of natural energy if he calls upon God for an added source of energy, which God will give him on certain conditions. Then we can overcome all of the defects of our nature. And that power or energy of God is given freely, gratis. That is why it is called grace. Which brings us now to the rules for character development. One of the first rules of character training is to remember that character is in the will and not in the intellect. The intellect, or the brains, or the mind, is the seat of knowledge. The will is the seat of choices, loves, motives, and responsibilities. Almost all of education today is directed to the communication of knowledge and not to the development of character. It is the mind that is changed, that is trained, rather than the will that is developed. And every decision that we make, every deed that we perform, almost every word that we say, goes into the making of our character, either for good or evil. You remember seeing icicles formed? And a drop would fall upon the tiny little icicle and add to its substance and its quantity, and then more drops. And if the drops that fell were pure, the icicle itself would be pure. If the drops that fell were soiled and dirty, the icicle itself would be dirty. And so it is with character. All of our decisions pour down into its making. And if they're good acts, we turn out to be a good character. If they are evil, we turn out to be unhappy and frustrated and full of anxieties and fears. This will of ours is really the only thing in the world that is our own. God can take anything else away from us. He could take away our health, any wealth or possessions that we might have. The one thing that he leaves us, always our own, is our will. And people today really do not want their wills. They do not want their freedom. That sounds strange, but it is true. The tendency today is to shift responsibility for decisions onto something else. For example, a boy does something wrong, and they say, well, it's due to grade B milk, insufficient playgrounds, or those naughty ductless glands. Child itself is hardly ever to blame. The present tendency in the world today, actually, is to reduce all responsibility to something which is subhuman. For example, Marx says that we are what we are because of economic conditions. In other words, our free will amounts to naught. Responsibility has been nullified. The Freudian tradition, for example, would say that to a large extent we are not economically determined, but biologically determined. And then it is felt that if we can ever bring to the surface something that is hidden down here, just bring it to the surface, that we will be cured and we'll be good and normal. No, that does not follow. It does no good to analyze the constituency of the water that gets into a sinking ship. You do not explain the oak simply by analyzing the rotten acorn from which it came. The real seat of character is here in the will. And we must not surrender that responsibility to the masses, as Marx would have it, or to any kind of biological determinism. Because if our will is determined by forces outside of ourselves, we no longer will make amendment for our misdeeds. And no character will ever grow without a constant resolution toward amendment. Character, as a matter of fact, is made by very severe discipline. You've seen a sculptor at work on marble, and the sculptor will first of all take a heavy chisel, and then will cut away great, huge chunks of marble. And then with more delicate blows, he will begin to bring out the image until finally perhaps all that is needed to reveal it is just the brush of a hand. And in the training of character, we have certain tendencies in us that are evil, that have to be every now and then repressed. And no one single blow or act will do it. And we have to take this mallet of our will, this chisel of our determination, and we knock off huge, great chunks of selfishness. And then later on, with more refined detachment and asceticism of the spirit, we finally come to a point where our character is really revealed and we appear as we ought to be and as God intended us to be. So rule number one, then, is character is in our will. Rule number two, and this applies to character training in others, we must always look for the best that is in others. When people are down because they have sinned, because they have made a mistake, or because life is against them, or because they consider themselves failures, there is nothing that is more important than to give them the helping hand and to be, in their regard, an apostle of encouragement. There is something good in every single person of the world if we would only just lay hold of it. And notice that was what our blessed Lord did when he went to the well, tired and thirsty, one day, and a woman came out at noon to draw water. It was very unusual for a woman to come and draw water at noon. And the explanation was she was an evil woman and the other women would not allow her to come with them. Now, what common denominator was there between our divine Lord, who was innocence itself, and this woman who had 5 husbands and was living with someone who was not her husband? There was only one common denominator that was left. There was only one good thing in that character that our blessed Lord could find. And down he went until finally he found it. And that common denominator was a common love of a drink of cold water. Whenever God wishes to do a favor, he very often asks for one. We asked her for a drink. And then he led her on from the thirst for natural water to the thirst of her own soul. He looked for what was best in her. When we see others, therefore, who are defeated or cast out by others, give them the helping hand. I remember a couple of years ago I was in Boston, and I was eating in the dining room of the Hotel Statler. And at noon I looked up and I saw two shoeshine boys that were leaning on a great purple curtain that was at the entrance of the dining room. These boys had on dirty T-shirts and crude shoeshine boxes thrown over their backs. Their hands, of course, were black both with dirt and with shoe polish. And as soon as the head waiter, the Statler, saw them, he says, "Get out of here!" So he chased the boys out. I left the dining room and went out after them. And I engaged them in conversation. And I said to one of them, we will call his name Johnny, though that is not his name. And I said, "Johnny, where do you go to school?" He said, "I go to such and such a school." But he said, "I was thrown out of this particular school." And he mentioned the name of some Catholic school he was thrown out of. And I said, "Why don't you go back?" He said, "They won't take me back." Well, I said, "Will you go back if I get you back?" He said, "You can't get me back. Nobody can get me back." Well, I said, "I can get you back." He said, "Who are you?" Well, I said, "I won't tell you who I am, but you just tell me the name of the sister and I will write to her and get you back." So I wrote to the good sister and I told her something I believe I mentioned on television some weeks ago about the three boys that were thrown out of schools, Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. And I said, nobody knows who were the valedictorians of those particular classes, but who did not know Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. And I'm sure that the educators wish that they could take back those boys again. So why not take back Johnny and give him another chance? I see Johnny every now and then. He's a very, very fine young fellow, and, well, so very good I will not even talk about it now over the air, except to tell you that in all things we look for the best that is in other people. Remember when St. Paul went to the hill of the Areopagus in Athens? Here he was to meet the senators of Greece. And on the way up to this hill, everywhere he passed statues of pagan deities. St. Paul knew that he could never win over those senators with the higher life that he was preaching unless he found some common denominator with them, looked for something that was good in their lives. And when he addressed them, he did not give them an harangue about all of their pagan statues. Rather, he said, "Gentlemen, I perceive that you are religious. For I saw on the streets, your streets, a statue to the unknown God. That God whom you know not is the God whom I preach to you." It was the only thing that St. Paul could find, and yet it was all that he needed. And so, in dealing with other characters, find something that is good, like the poor street cleaner that died, and everyone abused him. He said he was unfaithful to his wife, and he was an alcoholic, and he was dishonest, and everything else. And one man looking around for a common denominator and for the good things said, I know all of those things, but he said he did sweep clean around the corners. And there must be in every single life some good little detail like that we can begin with and use it as the stepping stone for character formation. And finally, the last rule. We always look for what is worst in ourselves. We are all failures in one department of life or the other. And how do we know what is worse than ourselves? Well, by looking into our character, into our conscience. We all have one dominant fault. The 7 pallbearers of character, or the 7 dominant faults, are easy enough to analyze. They are pride, covetousness, lust, anger, envy, gluttony, sloth. Pride, egotism, selfishness, covetousness, desire of possessing that which belongs to others, inordinate love of flesh, lust, anger, hot-headedness, gluttony, overeating, sloth, laziness, and envy, and jealousy. If we would, after an examination of conscience, lay hold of this dominant fault of ours, we could make that the basis of the strongest part of our character. Sometimes the tooth that is filled is the strongest tooth in the head. St. Paul says, power is made perfect in infirmity. Perhaps I can explain that by telling you that some years ago, 2 boys in Kansas used to run to school every morning. They earned a few extra pennies, it seemed, by lighting the stove. This particular morning, by some mistake or other, gasoline was put into the can instead of kerosene, and the stove exploded, and one of the boys was burned so badly that they were told that he never would walk again. The boy began rubbing his legs, said he would walk again. The doctor said it was impossible. And yet he laid hold of that which was worst in himself, that which even seemed to be impossible, so concentrated upon it, that he perfected himself and he became one of the great milers of America, Glenn Cunningham. And so it is with character. And the good Lord would have us lay hold of what is worst in ourselves. Do not think that people who have virtue and kindness and other great talents for helping other people just came by these things naturally. They had to work at them very hard. You've often heard that Moses was meek. Yes, Scripture says he was the meekest man who ever lived, but Moses was not always meek. As a matter of fact, Moses once killed an Egyptian. And then after he was given the commandments, he came down and found his people adoring a brazen calf, and he smashed the tablets on a stone. He was the first one in the world to break all the commandments at once. Well, Moses, therefore, was a very hot-headed creature. So Moses had to work with his character. And finally he worked on it until he became very meek. Now, the reason I speak about character training is because we're getting into a great world crisis, and it's becoming very serious. And in a crisis, what is going to come out is what is already in us. The woodsmen say that when a log is thrown into a fire, that it reveals all the colors that went into it as a tree, namely the purple of the dawn, the red of the sunset, the silver of the moon, the gold of the lightning, the darkness of the storm. And when the log is put into this crisis of fire, all of these colors come out. And so it is with character. All of our choices and decisions that have gone into the making of our personality will come out in a crisis. And a crisis is coming upon us. There is not much peace outside of us, and the only real peace that we can be sure of is the peace that is on the inside. And when we are building our character, we need some model on the outside, someone with justice and mercy and goodness and a spirit of sacrifice will inspire us to tear off these chunks of selfishness that we may be like unto him. For as he said, I have given you an example. May all the American characters begin to emerge now under the grace of God. As we continue to be a great nation, loving one another in a spirit of charity, loving God who made us and blessed us. God love you.
People of all faiths recognize Bishop Fulton J. Sheen as one of the greatest communicators of the 20th century. He was born in El Paso, Illinois, in May of 1896. As a young boy, he knew he wanted to be a priest. He served as an altar boy at St. Mary's Cathedral in Peoria, Illinois. At St. Viator College, his education and debating skills taught him the skills he used throughout his life. His unique ability at being natural and at ease in front of any audience was noted early in his ministry. He was ordained in 1919 and went on to become one of the best-known and greatly loved priests in church history. He wrote 96 books and hundreds of articles and columns. He broadcast numerous radio and TV programs. People from all faiths watched him on television because he spoke to every man. They always...
Without deciding which...
All sudden, why are you moving along? Moving along without me. Without me. Without me. You seem to be doing just fine without me. You're smiling all of the time without me. Your world keeps spinning round and round without you. I'm sad and I'm scared, that's why I frown. Tonight is so cloudy. I see the raindrops in the sky. I'm trying to say howdy, but I don't even really know why. I try to reminisce on all the good times that we shared, but then I start to miss when you actually cared, when you cared about me. About me. Without me. Without me. You seem to be doing just fine without me. You're smiling all of the time without me. Your world keeps spinning round and round without you. I'm sad and I'm scared, that's why I frown.
One is to be. You see, I heard many a woman say, I must now put on my face. Did you ever hear that? I heard of one who said, I must now put on my eyes. I must now put on my lips. Well,
is one the same person, with a new face, new eyes, new lips, without them? Some women need only two things to make them beautiful: soap and water. Others need many other things. I heard of a man who had a choice to marry an opera singer who was very ugly, sang beautifully, and an uneducated cook who was very beautiful. He finally decided that he had better marry the opera singer because she would give him more prestige. So it was decided. First morning after the honeymoon, woke up, took a look at the opera singer, and he said, "For heaven's sake, sing!" See, he had a problem, too, the identity crisis. Much has been written about it, particularly by Erickson, and he restricted it to some extent to youth. But it is not a phenomenon that belongs to youth alone, this discovery of self. The young indeed have it because the young people do have a terrible crisis. A young person reaches an age where he wants to be himself. He separates from parents. I want to be an individual, but at the same time that he wants to be an individual, he wants to conform to what everyone else is doing. Wear the same clothes, talk the same language, love the same music. But old people have the crisis, too, of discovering which is self. The difference between the young and the old in an identity crisis is that the old in the identity crisis look back to deny the past and responsibility, and the young look to the future and deny the responsibility of the future. So both of them have trouble. Now I'm going to give you three kinds of, well, identity crises. The point is, and this is the reason we've chosen this telecast, is one must be careful in seeking identity to discover which self one really is. And I think that today I will ask my angel to leave all the writing on the blackboard, unless I change my mind, so that you can see the three. The first kind of crisis is this, where a person wears the mask but has no face. That is to say, a perpetual phony. There was someone who wrote a poem some years ago, and the poem was about a woman who was always seen holding a mask before her face. She held it sprightly and gaily. And one day someone pulled away the mask, and there wasn't any face. She was just her sham. So some say they are their true selves when they're only the mask. Take, for example, an alcoholic. An alcoholic is completely identified with his alcohol. He will say, well, this is my nature. I can't help it. It's the way I am. Or an LSD victim. They never try to get below that mask to discover their real self. It was just that made T.S. Eliot, the poet, speak of ourselves as being hollow men, straw men. And he says that when the world ends, the world that's full of hollow men, it will end not with a bang, but with a whimper. Some keep this masquerade, this phoniness, this hypocrisy so much before them that they would hardly recognize their true self if they met it. The Danish philosopher and theologian Kierkegaard told a very interesting story about a peasant who had saved up enough money to buy himself some new boots and new colored stockings. He came into town, bought the boots and the colored stockings. He had some money left, so he got drunk. And he threw himself in the curb. Funny how often drunks end in curbs, isn't it? I heard of one drunk who was walking along with his foot on the curb and the other in the gutter. And the cop came along and said, "You're drunk." He said, "Oh, thank God, I thought I was a cripple." Well, this, I'm sorry I interrupted the story. But at any rate, this drunk threw himself in the curb, and another peasant came along with a cart and horse, and he shouted to the drunk. He says, "Get out of the way. I'll run over you." And the drunk said, "I don't care. They're not my legs." He didn't know himself with his new boots and his new stockings. And he was just so much his old self that he couldn't tell the new. And that's the way people are with the mask without the face. They have no care for others. As Peer Gynt, in the work of Conrad, said, the people are sometimes met in mental institutions. He said they have no care for others. They live in a barrel of self, and they're corked with a bung of self. No concern, no love, no care. Like a priest was telling me some time ago, talking about not caring, about a former pastor years ago that bought a horse. And he said to the farmer, "Can it see all right?" "Oh, yes," he said. "It sees perfectly." "Can it run all right?" "Yes." So he picked up a stone. He threw it at the horse, ran like a racehorse. It ran right into a tree. And the priest said to the farmer, "I thought you said that the horse could see all right." He says he does, but he just doesn't give a darn. Well, that's the way people are. People are that wear the mask but no face. They have no care of others, no love of neighbor. They've lived in this make-believe world so long, and they say, "This is my true identity." That's why one has to be so careful about saying, "I must seek my identity." What kind of identity is one seeking? This kind of mockery has some bad effects. It has psychic effects, which cannot be ignored. There was a German war story told about a Jewish couple who had a son who was paralyzed. And they went to a neighbor and they said to the neighbor, "We are Jews, we're going to be killed by Hitler. But we want you to take care of this paralyzed son of ours. We'll give you this house, we'll give you our property. But just care for him." The neighbor promised to do it. He killed the son, confiscated the property, and lived on it. And then a lump began to appear in the back of his neck. And he would press it, and it would come out on his forehead. And he pressed the forehead, come out on his chest. Press it there, it would come out somewhere else. So though people wear the mask, though they have this kind of makeup, they nevertheless are psychologically disordered on the inside until they discover their true self. But there's another step. And the second step is the mask. The mask that knows it has a face, though it is only a subconscious knowledge. See how good my angel is? He doesn't erase today. Remember other times I could go there and write something and immediately he would clean it. Have you ever been able to figure out why he doesn't erase some days? I'm not telling him. The angels are much wiser than men. And they're much wiser than anyone on a television show, too. Well, there's the mask that knows it has a face. I suppose a good example of this kind of identity crisis would be a woman who comes home from a ball, a dance. I didn't mean ball in the modern sense of the word, dance. And she's been in evening clothes, has on jewels, and her hair was well adorned, and her eyes, maybe her eyelashes made long, and so on and so forth. She comes home, the dance is over, and she sits before the mirror, looks at herself. Maybe she says, I'm beautiful. This is the real me. That's bad grammar, but that's what she might say. This is the real I if she were a school teacher, she would say, or came from Boston. And yet she knows that in a little while she's got to take off that makeup. She knows there's a face under that. Maybe she'll put on another kind of face. I heard of a woman who put on so much cold cream and oil that she slid out of bed every night. Sorry. Now, people that are in this state have not discovered their true identity. They suffer from a tension and a pull and a duality between what they seem to be and what they really are. And they know that the mask and the face are not the same. They know the way they appear to others is not the way they are on the inside. Now, what's Freud's explanation of that tension and that anxiety? Well, Freud says people are anxious and unhappy because they wanted to do something and were afraid to do it. Remember his language about the id and the superego? The id, or the instincts and so forth. The id wants to do something and the superego says, no one crushed it, and they became very anxious. That's not the real reason. People have a tension, people of this kind, have a tension not because they wanted to do something and didn't do it, but because they did something and wish they hadn't, which is very, very different. Now let me give you an example of that, because this is particularly common, this attitude, among the young. A boy and a girl in college went out auto riding. And the boy was telling the girl, you know, it's marvelous how the world has changed. We're now in a universe of great freedom. All the old sex taboos have been done away with. We can put anything we want on the stage today and on television. And furthermore, we do not have to obey any of the old moral laws simply because any of the consequences of sex have been done away with. Psychology has told us not to be worried if we break what was formerly called a moral law. And so he argues and argues with the girl until he finally breaks down her virtue, as he did in this particular historical case. It happened. On the way back, he said, "Now let me give you a little advice. You must never tell anybody about this. Never. First of all, never tell the man you're going to marry. Don't tell any girls in the dormitory. They won't like you, or they'll be suspicious of you, or they'll tell other boys, and then you'll just become common property among all of them. Then watch yourself. Look out for venereal diseases. All changed. Why did he say one thing on the way out and another thing on the way back? It was the mask on the way out. It was the face on the way back. So people know they have a mask, even when they deny it. And young people, college people at this age, will sometimes become very aggressive in defense of the mask. And particularly against parents, when the parents correct them. They become very angry, much more angry than they should, and the reason is they're afraid of exposure. What are the parents going to do, tear off this mask? There are many other characteristics of this age, but I see I have only 6 minutes and 28 seconds to tell you, so we'll not be able to develop it. Then, too, we might also say in this connection, this is a dangerous thing to talk about, and I'm not complaining against social justice. May God grant us all social justice, but it can very well be that sometimes people are interested in social justice to cover up the want of individual justice. They will plead a great love of neighbor in order to cover up a want of true love on the inside. So these are the masks and the face. Now we come to the third and the last. Third and the last stage is where there is a mask and no face. This is identity. Now we come to the real self, but this is hard, to tear off that mask. Tearing off that mask in order to be one's true self, getting rid of all shams and pretenses and make-believes, almost puts one in exactly the same position as the Israelites before they went into the Promised Land. The spies they sent out came back, and they brought news of great abundance. Here were the grapes that were carried on poles by men. This is the fruit and abundance of this Promised Land. But on the other hand, they were told the walls went up to the heavens and the men were giants and as thick as grasshoppers. They wanted to go in, and they were afraid to go in. And so one wants to tear away the mask, and one is afraid to do it. But the moment one becomes unacceptable to self, that's the point. Unacceptable to self, one begins to be very acceptable to God. This was brought out very well, remember, in the woman taken in sin. Here the Pharisees had found the woman in adultery, so they said. Just think of the snooping that went on, huh? To have caught this woman in adultery. And here they bring her to our Lord. They said she should be stoned, which was indeed the Mosaic law. So was he going to be just and have her stoned, or was he going to be merciful? If he was merciful, he would disobey the law. What did he say? He said, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And he began to write. What we wrote, we do not know. But he looked at them. I think he looked at one of them through the mask. And he wrote the word thief. Looked at another, wrote the word murderer. Looked at another, tore off the mask, and wrote adulterer. And they left. They left one by one, beginning with the eldest. That's interesting. It was the older men who first tore off the masks, not the young. The old are more convertible, evidently. The old have passed through so much sham, they're ready to get rid of it. And then he said to the woman, "Woman, where are they that accuse thee?" She said, "They are not here, my Lord." And he said, "Neither will I. Neither will I accuse thee." So her mask was torn away, and so was their mask. Let the young, therefore, who are seeking true identity, be sure of the identity that they seek, that it's not a mask, and they'll never discover their real self until they've gone through the troubling of the waters. It's only then that paralyzed souls are cured, like Augustine. And then it is, when the mask is off, that one can say with Augustine, our hearts are restless, restless, and they cannot find peace until they rest in Thee, O Lord.
Bishop Sheen will return in a moment.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees.
How long does time seem to last? Do you know how